The golden light from the chandeliers poured down over Rosemont Café, as though intent on emphasizing the grandeur of the place. Polished marble tables, crystal glasses shimmering like captive stars, the delicate clink of silver spoons against fine porcelain, all conspired to create an atmosphere so refined it made anyone who entered feel smaller than they were. Inside that room, the patrons were almost entirely white, dressed in tailored suits and flawless evening gowns. They conversed with a measured ease, lifted glasses with a casual pride, and wore faint smiles that suggested every word they spoke deserved to be printed on the cover of a magazine. But in one corner of the room, there was a silence that did not belong. A girl of about 10, her hair neatly tied back, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses, was fumbling with her hands across the smooth surface of the table. She searched for something that should have been there, a braille menu, but there was nothing, only the cold flatness of marble. Her lips trembled as a whisper broke free. "Mummy, come back soon. Mummy, please come back soon." No one in the cafe turned around. A few glances slid her way, but quickly veered off, as though the presence of a blind child in this glittering world was not something meant to last too long. From behind the counter, Amara Lewis stood frozen. 28 years old, her dark skin gleamed smooth as onyx, but no one here saw beauty in that. Dressed in a faded uniform, she blended into the background of the room, her presence permitted only when carrying trays and lowering her gaze. But Amara saw. She saw clearly the small hands wandering across an empty table. She heard the tremor in the whisper, a sound that tightened the chest of anyone who truly listened. A couple seated nearby chuckled softly, their words pitched just high enough for Amara to hear. Strange, leaving the girl like that. Must be some Whitfield-style lesson. Hardly worth worrying about. The child will be fine. They always have the money to fix everything. Laughter dissolved into the background music. But in Amara's chest, something shifted. She knew well the feeling of being abandoned in a room full of light yet steeped in darkness when everyone pretended not to see you. Her hand clenched around the rag she carried. She drew in a long breath. In that moment, Amara was no longer just a waitress on her shift. She was someone who had seen too often indifference wrapped in elegance, who had heard too frequently cruelty disguised as polite laughter. The child was whispering for her mother. But perhaps what she needed, more than a mother's return, was someone, anyone, courageous enough to step forward, despite the waiting eyes of a room poised to judge. Amara remained behind the counter, her gaze locked on the small figure curled into the velvet chair in the far corner. The child's whispers had faded into a heavy silence, as though even fear itself had grown tired. The room carried on, with the murmur of expensive conversations, but to Amara all else blurred into nothing. Only those small, trembling hands searching across cold marble remained. She took a step out from behind the counter, then stopped when a familiar low voice rose behind her. "Amara, where do you think you're going?" It was Brandon, the cafe's manager. He leaned on the bar with one arm, the other scrolling idly across his phone, his eyes indifferent, as though nothing in this room was worthy of his full attention. At table 9, the little girl sitting alone, "She looks terrified, I think." Brandon cut her off, his tone tinged with mockery. "That's a VIP guest. No one touches that table without orders from her mother. Mrs. Whitfield doesn't like strangers, especially—" He left the sentence dangling, but his eyes flicked up, pausing deliberately on Amara's skin. The meaning he refused to say aloud was already clear. Amara's fists clenched. "It's been over 20 minutes. She hasn't eaten, I think at least." Brandon snapped his phone shut and set it on the counter with a sharp crack. This time he looked straight at her, his gaze cold as marble. "Amara, remember, you're still on probation. I don't want any trouble that forces me to write in your file that you don't belong here." Nearby, a group of patrons tittered. A blonde woman, pearls gleaming at her ears, leaned toward her husband, whispering just loud enough for others to hear. Ridiculous. They think the kindness of a black waitress can substitute for a mother's care. Her husband chuckled, setting his espresso cup down. What did you expect? They don't understand their place. Another middle-aged man joined in, his voice quiet but cutting like a knife. This is amusing. A blind child left alone, and the black waitress thinks she's a heroine. Just wait. Within minutes she'll learn pity has no place in our world. Laughter trickled across the room, soft, polite on the surface, yet soaked with the bitterness Amara knew too well. She drew in a deep breath. Each word landed like a stone, but none were new. She had heard them since childhood, in schoolyards, on buses, in supermarkets. Words wrapped in civility but steeped in contempt. They did not shout, they did not curse, they smiled and erased her from the picture of a world deemed perfect. Amara returned to the counter, laid her hand on the cleaning rag, trying to steady herself. But her eyes could not leave the little girl in the corner. Lila had just dropped her spoon. The faint ring of metal on stone made the entire room pause for a second before whispers rushed back in. A young man in a checked suit lifted his wine glass and smirked. If her mother doesn't return soon, that child will spoil the whole atmosphere. No one wants awkwardness at a refined table. A woman clicked her tongue. And none of us wants to see a black waitress come forward with cheap charity. It would only make the scene more grotesque. Amara heard every word. Brandon did too. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a hiss meant only for her. Listen carefully. Someone like you should know her place. You're paid to clear tables, not to play the hero. Amara felt her chest compress as though the air had been sucked out of the room. Each laugh, each sidelong glance was a reminder that she walked a tightrope. One misstep, and everything would collapse. Yet in the corner, the child still sat. Her small hands waved helplessly through empty air, searching for something to hold. Her breath came in trembling sighs so fragile that anyone who truly listened might feel their own heart crack. Amara glanced at the clock, 4:45. Brandon had been right about one thing. It had been nearly an hour and a half since the mother left. No child should be abandoned that long, in a room drenched in light but cold as stone. For a moment, a memory surged. Her younger brother, Marcus, was a miner and trembling on a rickety chair in a free clinic, waiting for their mother. His blind eyes turned towards a door that never opened. That day, Amara had been powerless. She could only hold his hand tight to ward off the fear. The memory beat against her chest like a drum. She knew she could not turn away. But she also knew that stepping forward meant placing her fragile future in the hands of people eager to crush it. A crisp laugh rang out from a nearby table. A woman draped in fur, her smile sharp. Leave the child. Her mother will return. People like us don't need the cheap kindness of a colored girl. People like us. The words echoed in Amara's head. An invisible boundary drawn in skin and wealth cut the room in two, and she, unmistakably, did not belong to the side of light. She set the rag down. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes grew steady. Across the room, Lila whispered again, "Mummy, please." Her voice was small, forlorn, yet to Amara it was a cry for rescue. Brandon saw the look in her eyes, his brow furrowing. "Amara, don't. Listen to me. Don't you dare cross that line. That isn't your place, if you even try." He never finished. Amara had already turned, her worn shoes clicking against the tiled floor. In that instant, every gaze in the room swung toward her. Cold stares, curled lips, mocking smiles, an invisible tribunal ready to deliver judgment. But Amara walked on. Slow, steady. Each step was a silent refusal of every prejudice draped over the room. And in that moment, beneath chandeliers blazing with arrogant light, amidst laughter as sharp as glass, An ordinary black woman began to write a story no one had expected. Amara's footsteps echoed against the tiled floor, clear enough to drown out even the soft jazz drifting from the corner of the room. Each step tore through the heavy silence that polite laughter had tried to disguise. Every eye swung toward her, eyes belonging to people accustomed to sitting at the top of society, a place where a black waitress was never meant to step outside her role. Brandon, the manager, nearly shouted, "Amara, get back here now. Don't make me file your termination report today." But Amara did not turn. She only drew in a deep breath, keeping her stride even. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from fear, but from the knowledge that this moment would change everything. A middle-aged man curled his lip, lifting his glass with a sneer loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Look at that. A colored girl playing savior at table 9. I thought scenes like this only existed in films." Laughter rippled through the room. A few faces nodded along, entertained as though watching a cheap performance. A silver-haired woman, pearls gleaming at her throat, whispered, "Pathetic. She doesn't understand that her pity only makes us more uncomfortable." Amara heard it all, but none of it stopped her. She reached table 9. Before her, the child, Lila, sat withdrawn, her small frame trembling, hands wet from the toppled vase. Her satin dress clung damp to her body, blotched with spreading stains. Her head hung low, lips quivering, no longer calling for her mother, only breaking into faint sobs. Amara knelt to the girl's level, her voice gentle, slow, like a sister's whisper to soothe a younger sibling. "Hello, my name is Amara. I've come to help. You're safe now." The child's shoulders jerked. She lifted her head, dark glasses reflecting Amara's face. "Mom, where's my mom?" Amara smiled, a smile meant to reassure, though she herself was unsure how long she could hold it. "She hasn't returned yet, but I'm here. I can help clean this up. And if you'd like, I can bring you a cup of hot chocolate. Would you like that?" Lila was silent for several seconds, her lips quivered, and then she whispered so faintly that Amara had to lean close to catch it. "I spilled the flowers. Mom will be angry." Amara reached for a clean cloth, blotting the damp fabric of the dress. "No one's angry. Everyone spills things sometimes. Once, I even spilled an entire tray of glasses right in front of a full room. Can you believe that?" A tiny smile flickered across the girl's lips. She shook her head slightly. "You're lying. I can't see, but I know when grown-ups lie to make me feel better." Amara let out a soft laugh, like stumbling upon light in the middle of the night. "You're clever. All right, you caught me. Just a little spill, but nothing serious. Your dress is still beautiful." Around them, the whispers persisted. A man muttered venomously, "Absurd. A colored woman sitting equal with Eleanor Whitfield's daughter." Another woman added, "These days, they no longer know their limits." Amara did not answer. She turned back to the girl. "What's your name?" "Leela." "Leela, what a beautiful name. Would you like some hot chocolate? I'll make it sweet, and you don't have to tell your mother if you don't want to." A pause, then the slightest nod. The smile that broke across Lila's face, small and fleeting as it was, felt to Amara like a silent victory, a victory too modest for applause, but enough to lighten her heart. Amara rose and walked briskly to the counter. Brandon nearly lunged at her, his face red with fury. "What the hell did you just do, Amara? Do you realize you're digging your own grave?" Amara did not answer. She took a cup, poured milk, stirred chocolate, her hands moving with the rhythm of ritual. Brandon leaned in, his voice sharp and low. "If you take that to table 9, don't blame me. I'll sign your termination this instant. People like you aren't allowed mistakes in this room." Amara paused, looked straight at him, her gaze unwavering. "If helping a frightened child is a mistake, then I accept it." She turned, tray in hand, a steaming cup of hot chocolate and a small plate of cookies, and walked back to the corner. When she set the tray down, Lila's hand reached out, fumbling. Amara gently guided it, placing the child's fingers on the handle of the cup. "Here, careful, it's hot." Lila sipped, then exhaled, a shy smile softening her lips. "It's delicious. I've never had this without Mum." Amara sat across from her, her voice lowered. "Sometimes a little secret can be good. Let's keep this one between us, sisters." In that moment, the bitter laughter around them faded. What remained was the bright sound of a child's soft giggle, fragile yet clear. Not everyone welcomed it. At a table behind, a man leaned toward his companion. "Look at that. A Negro woman is sitting with Eleanor Whitfield's daughter. Shameful for Rosemont Café." Others nodded, whispers cutting the air like knives. But Amara did not turn toward them. She listened as Lila spoke of Braille books she loved, of music she could hear with her heart. Under the cafe's glittering light, the scene was strange. A blind girl laughing, a black woman listening with complete respect. It upended the order the room had always known, an order where white voices filled the center and black hands stayed in the shadows. At that moment, the cafe doors opened. A black Bentley gleamed outside, and stepping in, clad in a perfect business dress, was Eleanor Whitfield, the Iron Woman, CEO of Whitfield Dynamics, mother of Lila. The atmosphere shifted at once. Chairs scraped back, staff bowed low. Conversations dwindled to silence, as though everyone waited for her judgment. And Eleanor's piercing gaze swept the room, only to stop at table 9, where a black waitress in a faded uniform sat opposite her daughter, sharing hot chocolate, smiling together like sisters. In those eyes, Amara saw a storm gathering, and she knew what had just happened was only the beginning of a much larger reckoning. The air inside Rosemont Café thickened like a sudden fog when Eleanor Whitfield entered. Her steps were unhurried, yet authority radiated from her every movement, silencing the entire room in a single beat. All the whispers, the polite laughter from moments before, vanished into a taut and waiting silence. Her fitted business dress traced the frame of a woman in her 40s, every seam cut with precision as though designed to declare that this was someone who never tolerated mistakes. A diamond-studded watch flashed under the chandelier's golden light. Every detail of Eleanor was its own proclamation. Here stood a woman who could topple a corporation with the tilt of her head. She ignored Brandon, who bowed and stammered his apologies, spilling excuses as though they might save him. Eleanor raised one hand, just a small gesture, and he fell silent. Her eyes cut straight toward table 9. There, Amara still sat beside Lila. Before the child, a half-finished cup of hot chocolate and cookie crumbs were scattered on the plate. But what froze the room was not the cup or the crumbs, it was the radiant smile across Lila's face, a smile few had ever seen. Eleanor stopped. Her grey eyes swept the scene, cold and sharp. Everyone held their breath. Then she spoke, slow and deliberate, each word edged with ice. "Amara Lewis, isn't it?" Amara's heart clenched. She had not expected Eleanor to know her name, but her gaze did not falter. "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor glanced at her daughter. "This child, did you feed her without permission?" Amara swallowed down the tremor rising in her chest, her voice steady. "She was hungry and frightened. I did only what was necessary." A ripple surged through the cafe. Patrons leaned into one another, their murmurs slicing the air. Good Lord, she's defending herself to Eleanor Whitfield? Colored woman daring to argue, in this room. Eleanor did not acknowledge the whispers. From her glossy leather bag, she drew a slim wallet, pulled out a platinum card, and placed it lightly on the table. How much? The silence that followed was suffocating. The question was not about the hot chocolate or the cookies. It was a denial, a dismissal of Amara's kindness, reducing it to a cheap commodity, something to be swiped and erased. Beneath the table, Amara's hands clenched tightly together. The entire cafe waited for her to nod, to take the money, to retreat as they had always seen people like her do. But Amara met Eleanor's eyes. Her voice rang out, slow, clear, without a tremor. "That won't be necessary, ma'am. This is not a bill. This is kindness." The room froze. A few patrons nearly choked on their drinks. One man sneered, loud enough for half the cafe to hear. "She doesn't know what she's doing. With someone like Whitfield, even a single refusal can end your life." Eleanor's expression did not change. She said nothing further, only turned and took her daughter's hand. "Come, we're leaving." But Lila tugged her hand back, her voice eager. "Mummy, Amara is so kind. She told me about constellations you can feel instead of see. Mummy, can we come back tomorrow? She promised to teach me how to tell cappuccino from macchiato just by the smell." The child's innocent words stunned the room. Every gaze turned to Eleanor, waiting to see her reaction to her daughter's praise of a black waitress. Eleanor showed no emotion. She gave a curt nod, her voice flat. "Very well, let's go." She led her daughter firmly toward the door, never once glancing back. Only when the cafe doors closed behind them did the murmurs erupt like a sudden storm. "Reckless! That waitress doesn't realize her career is finished." A colored girl thinking she could stand equal with Whitfield. How laughable! Amara sat still for a moment. A chill traced down her spine. She knew everything had changed. Brandon stormed over, his face flushed with anger and panic. "Office, now." Amara rose. The eyes that followed her were not admiring, but predatory, as though watching a small bird that had dared to fly into a circle of hawks. In the cramped office behind the counter, Brandon slammed the door. His voice was ground low, harsh. "Do you realize what you've done? You've destroyed any chance of a decent job in this city. It was already hard enough for someone like you to find work. Now, who will hire you when they hear you defied Eleanor Whitfield?" Amara did not answer. She only looked down at her hands, fingers still carrying the faint sweetness of chocolate, the scent of the moment that had made a child smile. Brandon exhaled sharply, his voice heavy. "I can't keep you here. Consider today your last day at Rosemont. Blame whoever you want, but remember, this isn't because of me. It's because of your skin and that defiant attitude of yours." The words cut like a blade. Amara knew he was not wrong. In a world where prejudice grew roots as deep as oak, a single act of standing up for a child was enough to push her into darkness. She left the office and walked out of the cafe. Outside, the sky had broken into rain. Cold drops lashed her face, mingling with something warmer rolling down her cheeks. Yet as she walked beneath the storm, a small voice still echoed in her heart. "Mummy, can we come back tomorrow?" A blind child in a room full of disdain had chosen to take her hand, had chosen to believe in her. And Amara knew, whatever the cost, that moment was no mistake. It was proof that sometimes kindness must stand tall, even when the whole world longs to break it. That night the rain fell endlessly, as though the sky itself had conspired with Amara's fate. She walked home to her small apartment on the city's edge, her worn canvas shoes soaked heavy with water. The streets shimmered beneath the lamps, but to Amara everything blurred into a grey veil. In her bag, the white envelope from Brandon remained, a short, merciless notice. Employment terminated, effective immediately. No lengthy explanations, only a few cold lines, enough to strip away a fragile livelihood. Her third-floor apartment was in an old building, its walls blotched with damp stains, the hallway silent but for the drip of rainwater through a leaking roof. When she opened the door, the familiar smell of mildew spilled out. And then came a voice, clear, familiar. "You're home, sis?" Marcus, her younger brother, sat at the table, his clouded eyes turned toward the door. 16 years old, he had lost his sight at 6 after a fever the poor hospital could not cure. Amara forced a smile, hanging up her drenched coat. "Yes, I am home. Have you eaten yet?" Marcus shook his head, lips pressing together slightly, as though listening harder to the rhythm of her steps. "Something's wrong. Your voice, it isn't the same." Amara faltered. She knew Marcus's hearing was sharper than anyone's. He could detect the tremor in her breath with ease. She meant to hide it, but his blind eyes, though unable to see, pierced straight through to the truth. "I lost my job, Marcus." For a moment, the room was so silent that the sound of rain at the window was stark and clear. Marcus exhaled slowly, but without surprise. He only nodded. "Because you helped someone, didn't you?" Amara sank into the chair across from him, her hair still damp, clinging to her face. She pressed her head into her hands, her voice breaking. "Yes, a little girl, left alone, blind, I couldn't look away, but to them, that was wrong. Wrong because of who I am. Wrong because of the color of my skin." Marcus reached across the table, fumbling until he found her hand. He clasped it tightly. "You always told me kindness is never wrong. If they punish you for that, then the wrong is theirs, not yours." Tears stung Amara's eyes, but she swallowed them back. She would not let him hear her sob. On the kitchen counter, bills were piled high. Overdue electricity, unpaid rent notices, and a sheet stamped in red. Eviction warning. The numbers pressed against her chest like stone. Amara exhaled, her voice weary. "We could lose this apartment, Marcus. No rent, no job. I don't know how to keep us afloat anymore." Marcus gripped her hand tighter, his voice steadier than his 16 years. "Do you remember? When I lost my sight, you dropped out of college. You worked 3 jobs all at once so that I could go to the school for the blind. Back then, everything felt impossible too. But you survived. You always survive." Amara bit her lip. In the darkness of the shabby room, his words glimmered like a faint light. Yet even that light struggled against the truth. This time, the enemy was not just poverty, but the power of a woman like Eleanor Whitfield. A sudden knock rattled the door. Amara flinched. It was late. No one ever came here at this hour. She stepped cautiously to the door. To door, her voice low. "Who is it?" A woman's voice answered, cold and clipped. "Miss Lewis, I'm Grace Lee, legal assistant to Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield. She requires your presence at Whitfield Tower, 9 a.m. sharp tomorrow." Amara froze. Her mind churned with questions. Why would Eleanor want to see her? To threaten, to destroy further, or to humiliate her again? Grace continued, her tone flat, without room for refusal. "Do not be late. Mrs. Whitfield does not like to wait." Her footsteps receded down the hall, leaving silence in her wake. Amara leaned against the door, her heart hammering. From inside, Marcus called, "Who was it?" Amara's reply was slow, her voice unsteady. "Whitfield's assistant. They want me there tomorrow morning." Silence hung for a moment. Then Marcus spoke, his tone deeper, firmer. "Sis, don't be afraid. Maybe this is the reason for everything that happened today. You always told me everything happens for a reason, right?" Amara let out a weary, crooked smile. The words she had once used to comfort him now returned to her like a mirror held up. Her eyes drifted to the termination letter still tucked in her bag, then to the pile of bills, then to Leela's smile, the fleeting light she had glimpsed in that cold cafe. Perhaps Marcus was right. Maybe all of this was only the beginning of another road. But where would that road lead? That night, Amara could not sleep. The rain drummed steadily against the window. In her mind flickered 2 worlds, one with Lila's bright, innocent smile, the other with Eleanor's grey eyes, hard as steel. And tomorrow morning, those 2 worlds would collide again, inside Whitfield Tower, a place where power and prejudice had never allowed a black woman like Amara to stand as an equal. The next morning, the city wore a thin veil of mist. The new sun had not yet burned away the dampness left by the night's rain. Amara emerged from the subway, lifting her eyes to Whitfield Tower looming before her. 50 stories of glass, gleaming like a colossal block of ice. Cold, distant, unyielding. People called it the steel heart of the city, the place where billion-dollar decisions were made in seconds. To Amara, it was a wall, one never meant for people like her. She adjusted her old business dress, which she had bought second-hand. Though carefully pressed, its frayed seams betrayed her among those accustomed to Hermes and Prada. The cracked heels of her leather shoes tapped against the marble floor of the grand lobby, the sound echoing like something lost and out of place in this world of wealth. The moment Amara stepped inside, the receptionist's eyes swept toward her. A white woman in a fitted suit, her smile cool, dismissive. "I'm sorry, human resources is in the other tower. This one isn't for job applicants." Amara tightened her grip on her bag, her voice steady. "I have an appointment. Grace Lee, assistant to Mrs. Whitfield." A flicker of surprise crossed the woman's face, quickly replaced by a hurried nod. "Of course, please wait. Elevator on the left." While she waited, two young men in crisp suits walked by. One whispered to the other, loud enough to carry. "Strange, a black waitress in this building? Who let her in?" "Probably cleaning staff, rare enough to see them through the front door." They smirked and kept walking. Amara heard every word, but only drew in a long breath. She had heard such words all her life. This time, they only strengthened her steps. The elevator carried her upward, doors opening onto the 50th floor, a room of glass walls gazing out over the city. The conference hall of Whitfield Dynamics was more than a workplace. It was a throne room of the modern age, long, vast, and cold. Eleanor Whitfield stood with her back to the door, gazing out through the towering window. When Amara entered, Grace Lee motioned her toward a chair at the long table. Silence stretched. Only the ticking of a wall clock filled the space. At last, Eleanor spoke, her tone even, as though addressing a board of directors. "Do you know why I called you here?" Amara replied slowly. "I only know you wish to see me. The reason, I do not." Eleanor turned, her grey eyes fixed on Amara, sharp as X-rays. "Yesterday I left my daughter alone for nearly 2 hours. It was a test, a social experiment." Amara froze. "You experimented? On a blind child?" Eleanor nodded, unwavering. "I wanted to see who had the courage or the foolishness or the compassion to approach her. 17 people passed by, staff, customers, even your manager. Not one stopped. Only you." Rage surged through Amara, her hands clenched tight in her lap, her voice controlled but edged with fire. "Adu, who used your own daughter as a pawn in a power game. That isn't a test. That is cruelty." Beside them, Grace Lee's face paled. Clearly no one had ever spoken to Eleanor in such terms. Eleanor's lips twitched, though not into a smile. "Interesting, most grow silent with fear when I say that, and you call it cruelty." The silence that followed pressed down heavy as stone. Eleanor lifted her hand. Grace immediately placed an envelope on the table, sliding it toward Amara. "And this is compensation for your termination at Rosemont. More than any cafe would pay you in a year. All you need to do is take it, sign, and disappear from our story." Amara stared at the envelope. She could picture the numbers inside, enough to cover the rent, enough to buy back a little stability. But in her heart, the memory of Lila's smile, the small, trembling hand clutching hers, rose like a flame. It burned through every hesitation. She pushed the envelope back, her voice firm. "I do not sell my kindness, not at any price." The room froze. Grace Lee's eyes widened as though she had forgotten how to breathe. Eleanor arched one brow. For the first time, perhaps, she looked intrigued. "Everyone has a price. You believe you are different." Amara held her gaze, her reply deliberate, unwavering. "I am different because I know compassion is not a bargaining chip. And what you did, turning a blind child into an experiment, is shameful." The silence now was no longer heavy but sharp, suspended like a blade. At last, Eleanor inclined her head slightly, her face no longer entirely of ice. "Remarkable. My daughter spoke of you. She said she has never felt so respected by anyone before. I need someone at her side, and clearly she has chosen you. She opened a second folder and slid it across the polished table. A new position, companion to Lila, 10 times what the cafe paid you. And I know of your brother, Marcus. I can secure him a place at Wellington Academy. Amara drew a deep breath. The offer was staggering, enough to transform Marcus's life. But the cost was stepping into Eleanor's world, the world of a woman who had turned her child into a test. The glass chamber of the 50th floor grew stifling. Amara felt as though she stood at a crossroads. One path, the steadfast defense of her dignity. The other, a chance to change her brother's destiny. In Eleanor's eyes, there was more than coldness. Something elusive flickered there, as though she were waiting to see which road Amara would choose. The easy one or the dark one from which there would be no turning back. The glass chamber on the 50th floor was silent, as if even the air itself held its breath, waiting for Amara's answer. Before her, the glossy file lay upon the long table, a doorway into an entirely different world. The numbers inside, salary, benefits, Marcus's scholarship, were immense, foreign, almost unreal to hands calloused from trays and mop handles. Amara sat motionless, the clock on the wall ticking out its merciless rhythm. In her mind flashed the image of red-stamped bills piled on the kitchen table. Marcus's voice echoed, "You gave up college for me, and you always found a way through." Then Lila's smile, the first spark of light in the cold hall of Rosemont Café. Eleanor Whitfield folded her arms, her eyes never leaving Amara's face. She did not hurry, like a hunter certain her prey would eventually stumble into the snare. And you must understand, opportunities like this are rare. All it takes is one word, one signature, and your life will change. Amara lifted her gaze, meeting those cold grey eyes. Why, me? Out of everyone in the world, you could choose anyone. Someone with degrees, a polished resume. Why a black waitress who just lost her job? Eleanor tilted her head, a faint smile flickering through it, though it never touched her eyes. Because Lila chose you, she has never spoken of anyone before. She has a gift. She can hear truth in a voice. And with you, she said, there was no deceit. Amara felt her chest tighten. Truth. A simple word, yet across from this woman of power. It burned like a lamp cutting through shadow. Grace Lee, the assistant, suddenly interjected, her voice soft but urgent. "Miss Lewis, Mrs. Whitfield does not take rejection well. If you value your situation, you should accept. Truly, I advise you to sign." Amara turned slightly toward Grace. In the woman's eyes flickered something like pity, not for Amara herself, but for anyone reckless enough to stand against Eleanor. She laid her hand on the folder, skimming the bold letters. Personal companion to Lila Whitfield. Salary, $120,000 per year. Full scholarship to Wellington Academy of Music for Marcus Lewis. The figure made her heart stumble. $120,000, a sum beyond imagination, not just enough to cover rent, but enough to lift her family from the generational chokehold of poverty. Yet even as the numbers tempted her, another voice whispered within, "This is not just a job, this is a trap." Amara closed the file, her eyes steady on Eleanor. "You think you can buy everything?" Eleanor raised a brow, not angered, rather amused. "No, not everything, but almost." Amara drew in a long breath. She knew. To accept meant living inside Eleanor's world. A world where kindness was suspect, where every gesture could be turned into a pawn in power's game. To refuse meant losing Marcus's one chance at his dream. The great room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing inward. Amara felt herself standing at the crossroads of fate, dignity on one side, her brother's future on the other. Eleanor slowly rose, circling the table, each step deliberate. She stopped behind Amara, bent slightly, her voice a low whisper against the silence. "No, you have few choices left. Sign. And remember, I do not make offers twice. Amara closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them again, brighter, as though decision itself had lit them. She picked up the pen, and in the gaze of everyone present, Amara signed her name. Grace exhaled in relief. Eleanor gave the faintest nod, her face composed, though in her eyes flickered the glint of victory. Amara set the pen down, turmoil heavy inside her. She knew she had stepped into a game whose rules were not her own. Yet in her heart, another spark kindled. Marcus's smile when he would hear of Wellington, and Lila's joy knowing Amara would remain by her side. Eleanor returned to her seat, her tone calm, detached. Good, it is done. From this day forward, you belong to me. And remember, everything you have, I give. And if I wish, I can take it away in a single breath. Amara stayed silent, but within her answered, no. No one can take what is born of truth. And soon you will learn. Not everyone has a price. In those first days of her new role, Amara stepped into Eleanor Whitfield's world like a stranger wandering through a glass labyrinth. Everything gleamed, yet each surface only fractured into endless illusions. The Whitfield estate, nestled in the wealthy suburbs, was less a home than a modern fortress. White walls, soaring glass windows, and corridors carpeted in silence that seemed to stretch without end. Amara was given her own room, a fresh uniform, and a personal access card. Yet every time she walked past the guards and house staff, whispers curled through the air like smoke. A black maid allowed in here? How strange. Perhaps the madam is testing something again. Amara had grown accustomed to such looks, but this time, rather than shrink, she let them slide past her and fixed her focus where it belonged, on Lila. With Lila, everything was different. The child glowed brighter after each conversation. Amara traced constellations into words for her, read Braille books by lamplight, and sometimes sat at the old piano while Marcus, her blind younger brother, phoned in to play a small piece for them both. In those moments, Amara saw it clearly. Lila longed to live as a child, not as a pawn in her mother's chessboard of control. One evening, while Amara was arranging Braille volumes in Lila's room, her hand brushed against a wooden box tucked deep in the closet's corner. With ears sharpened by silence, Lila asked at once, "Did you find my box?" Amara froze. Edgar Tumslop box. Bags, Lila. A mama's journal. Trevor helped me hide it, don't tell her. The name, Trevor, Eleanor's younger brother, caught Amara off guard. He was rarely spoken of, a man who lived outside the glare of public light. That night, after Lila had drifted to sleep, Amara opened the box. Inside lay a journal and a small USB drive. Her hands trembled as she slid it into her laptop. The screen lit up, files blooming one after another. The first image stopped her breath. An old video, Lila still sighted, racing across a garden drenched in sun, her laughter clear as bells, so cruelly at odds with the dark glasses she now wore. Other files followed, unpublished articles. CEO Eleanor Whitfield investigated for distracted driving. Whitfield's daughter faces risk of losing eyesight after accident. Amara clicked on an email. Short, sharp, from Trevor. Vic, the lawyers have handled it. The press won't raise it again. The other driver accepted the payout. The court agreed to seal the records. But Clara, no, Leela, deserves to know someday. Amara sat frozen, heart weighted like stone. Eleanor had been behind the wheel that day. It was she who buried the truth under money and silence. And for 5 years she had cloaked it all in shadows, as if the pain itself could be erased. Amara shut the laptop, pulse hammering. The room seemed to shrink, walls pressing closer. She remembered Lila's smile, remembered the tremor in her voice whispering "Mommy" in the cafe at Rosemont. Every memory now carried the taste of betrayal. The next day, Eleanor announced, "Tomorrow, Lila and I have an appointment with the Foundation for the Blind. Prepare her things." But beneath her clipped tone, Amara heard something else, a hollowness, a shield of ice. Before they left, Amara slipped a tiny tracker into Lila's backpack. As the car rolled away from the estate, she pulled out her phone, watching the green dot crawl across the city map. At first, it followed the expected route downtown. Then it veered out beyond the city into desolate suburbs until it halted at a remote medical facility nearly 100 kilometers away. Amara's chest tightened. She dialed Trevor. At first, his voice faltered, hesitant. Then it broke. "I know. Eleanor's been doing this for years. She cancelled every treatment for Lila. There were chances, real chances for recovery. She refused them." Amara's breath caught. Why? Why would she deny her own child? Trevor sighed it heavy with old grief. But because Eleanor believes that if Lila ever regained her sight, she'd see the truth. She'd see that it was her mother who blinded her. And Vic, Eleanor, could never bear that. So she chose to keep her daughter in darkness rather than face the light of truth. The words carved into Amara like knives. She clutched the phone, her blood running cold. On the other end, Trevor's voice lowered, urgent. "Amara, if you truly want to save Lila, you must confront Eleanor. I have the evidence, the cancelled treatments, the sealed court records. I've held them for years. Maybe now. It's time." Amara shut her eyes. In the dark, two images overlapped. Lila's radiant smile as Amara described constellations, and Eleanor's face, unyielding, declaring, "Everyone has a price." In that instant, Amara knew silence was no longer possible. The secret was out, and the truth would not remain buried in shadow any longer. That afternoon, dark clouds spread across the sky. Amara and Trevor sat in an old car, parked less than 100 meters from the remote medical facility. Through the windshield, they saw Eleanor's black Bentley gleaming at the entrance, crouched like a predator waiting for prey. In the lit room on the first floor, Lila sat on an examination chair, fingers entwined in nervous knots. Beside her stood a doctor in a white coat, holding a file. Opposite them, Eleanor's voice cut sharply through the slightly open window. "No further tests are necessary. The results are the same. No hope." Trevor's jaw tightened, his fist pounding the steering wheel. "She's doing it again, cancelling every chance Lila has. I can't bear it anymore." Amara placed a hand firmly on his shoulder, her voice calm yet resolute. "No, Trevor, not this time. Enough." They strode into the building, Amara's shoes striking echoes across the cold white corridor. When the door burst open, Eleanor spun around, fury flashing in her grey eyes. "What are you doing here?" Amara did not flinch. She stepped forward, laying the folder Trevor had handed her on the doctor's desk. "We're here to tell Lila the truth. All of it, the truth you buried for 5 years. Eleanor's face drained of color. "Amara, you don't understand. This is my family's matter. Leave at once." Trevor stepped forward, his voice trembling but firm. "Vic, I've stayed silent too long. Here are the accident files, the court documents, and the cancelled treatments. I kept them, hoping one day you'd have the courage to confess, but you never did." On the chair, Lila lifted her head. Behind the dark glasses, her face turned toward her mother. "Mum, what are they saying?" The air fractured. Eleanor opened her mouth, but no words came. Amara knelt, lowering herself to Lila's level, her voice slow and sharp, every word a blade. "Lila, 5 years ago, it was your mother behind the wheel. That accident was not blind fate. It was the result of one distracted moment, and afterward, she used money and power to hide it, to deny you the truth, to deny you treatment." The room thickened with silence. For a long moment, Lila said nothing. Then she turned her face toward Eleanor, her voice shaking, yet each word striking like a hammer. "I always heard you crying at night. I always knew something was hidden. But why? Why didn't you give me a chance? What were you afraid I'd see? Afraid I'd see that it was you who blinded me." Eleanor staggered back, her face pale. She raised trembling hands to cover it, then collapsed, her heels clattering against the floor. Leela, I couldn't lose you. I was terrified that if you regained your sight, you would hate me. I chose to keep you in darkness, so you'd never know I was the cause. Her voice cracked, breaking into ragged sobs. Lila rose, her small feet searching forward. She reached out, hands trembling, and touched her mother's tear-streaked face, tracing each wrinkle, each quiver. I wouldn't hate you for the truth. I hate you for the lies, for not believing I was strong enough to face it. The words split the silence wide open. The doctor bowed his head. Trevor wiped away a tear. Eleanor crumpled, her armor of power stripped, leaving only a desperate mother. Amara stepped forward, taking Lila's hand. Her voice was steady, deep. Leela, the doctor said there's still a chance. A new therapy. You can try if you choose. The decision is yours, no one else's. Lila drew in a long breath, turned toward her mother, then clasped Amara's hand tight. I want to try, and I want Amara with me. In that instant, the power in the room shifted. Eleanor, who had once believed everything could be bought, now bowed to her daughter's choice. She nodded, tears spilling, her voice breaking for the first time in years. Yes, you may try. No court, no headlines, no boardroom. Only the raw truth had brought down Eleanor's throne of silence. Power now belonged to a blind girl who dared choose light, and to a black woman who had refused to sell her soul. 6 months later, the Whitfield estate garden glowed gold with autumn. Maple leaves fluttered down, blanketing the stone paths. On a bench beneath the ancient oak, Lila sat with new special lenses over her eyes. Beside her, Amara patiently guided her through colors slowly returning to sight. Amara, I can see it. That tree, I see the outline, the brown, and the orange too. Her voice trembled with joy. Amara's eyes shone with tears, but she smiled, refusing to let them fall. Yes, Lila, that's autumn. You're seeing autumn for the first time. From the terrace, Eleanor watched silently. A teacup cooled in her hands, forgotten. Her once cold eyes glistened. No investor, no board of directors had ever broken her so quickly. Only her daughter and the woman she had scorned had shattered her iron shell. Trevor joined her, lowering himself onto the bench beside her. Look at her. She's never been so radiant. Eleanor nodded, her voice raw. 5 years? I stole 5 years from her, out of fear, out of guilt. Trevor, I was wrong. He rested a hand on her shoulder. It's not too late. What matters is that you stopped. Lila has forgiven you, and that forgiveness is worth more than any reputation. From the day Lila chose therapy, Eleanor changed. She left the office at 5, abandoning million-dollar meetings to take her daughter to treatment. The Whitfield Foundation for the Visually Impaired, once a hollow PR shell, transformed into a true force. Funding research, offering free classes, and granting scholarships to hundreds of blind children. Amara was no longer merely a companion. To the astonishment of the financial world, Eleanor gave her an executive role at the foundation, with 40% control. Because you saw my daughter as human, Eleanor said, while I saw only disability. Because you believed in truth, even when it hurt, and because I now know compassion cannot be bought. Marcus, Amara's brother, became a star pupil at Wellington Academy. On the night of his first concert, the hall rose to its feet as he performed a piece composed for his sister, Light in the Dark. On Lila's birthday, the Whitfield garden rang with the laughter of blind children from across the city. Their families gathered around. No politicians, no businessmen in tailored suits, only small footsteps, warm chatter, and the scent of cakes drifting in the air. Leela guided Amara and her mother to a corner of the garden, where she displayed her small clay sculptures. This is how I see the world, through my hands, and now, with a little light too. A boy asked innocently, Are you blind like us? Why do you wear glasses like Lila? Eleanor froze. Then she knelt, meeting the child's level, her voice tender. No, I am not blind. But once I was blind in another way. It was Lila and a very special friend who taught me to see again. That evening, after the guests had gone, Lila gave her mother a gift. A handmade painting, textured with raised strokes of color. The figures were clumsy, yet precise. Two shapes on a red-orange background, a child and a woman holding hands. So you'll remember that sometimes we must lose to learn to treasure. And so you'll remember, I have always seen you, even when my eyes could not. Eleanor embraced her daughter, her shoulders trembling. Amara stood nearby, witnessing a rare moment of healing, not through power, but through truth and love. As night fell, Amara looked up at the sky. Distant stars flickered, whispering their answer to the question Marcus had once asked. Is there light in the darkness? Now she could answer, yes. The light is always there. We only need the courage to find it.